So in this video, what I wanted to focus on is one particular area of the brain. Actually, two areas. I am going to sketch out not just one. I am going to show you how I think that these two areas can be kind of united in a way. So, these two areas where I am sketching out, these little green circles are going to be responsible for breathing. How fast you breathe, how deep you breathe, and there are lots of little neurons in these two areas. And these neurons are going to be communicating. Let's say these neurons send little axon, and down here, maybe this guy send an axon up here. They're going to be communicating information among themselves and between themselves to kind of make sure they are working in a cooperative way. In fact, the medulla are divided into areas: the VRG and the DRG, the ventral respiratory group and the dorsal respiratory group. But here I just put it all together and say this part of the brain is our respiratory center. This is going to be responsible for all important activities of our breathing. So here let me to write the respiratory center. So our respiratory center is going to gather information from different places, and then it is going to make a decision and execute beside on all the information it receives. So one key piece of information is going to come from cells right here, neighborhood cells, and these cells are called the central chemoreceptors. The reason I am calling them central because they are also a part of the brain. And specifically, they are going to gather information on things like carbon dioxide levels and pH levels. One thing they don't do is oxygen levels. And also we have peripheral chemoreceptors, and these ones are very important, and they exist outside of the brain. So they are going to be actually sending their information along through neurons that are going to extend all the way into the brain. For example, aortic body and the carotid body. And they are coming from different locations and are actually going to use different nerves to get into the brain. The carotid body, for example, is going to extend out this way through a neuron, and that's going to be through a nerve called the glossopharyngeal nerve, the cranial nerve number 9. Also, we have got some nerves or neurons projecting from the aortic body going through the vagus nerve. These peripheral chemoreceptors are going to detect things like oxygen. In fact, that is probably one of the most important things that they detect, as well as the carbon dioxide and pH. So, that information coming to the respiratory center from our peripheral and central chemoreceptor. In addition, there are another whole group of receptors called mechanoreceptors. And this one are actually going to be sending information about pressure. And you can find them in a place like the nose, the lung, and the GI tract. And now I will focus only in the lung. Let's talk an example about how this mechanoreceptor work. Let's talk an example. You are going outside and suddenly you inhale cigarette smoke, and let's say the lung doesn't like that, and then the mechanoreceptor feel that little particles. It's going to trigger cranial nerve number 10, the vagus nerve. Similarly, you have these stretch receptors that are in the lungs, and these are actually kind of interesting because they say, hey, this lung are starting to get really full, really distended, and they try to let the respiratory center to know that maybe it is the time to exhale. So now we have information about central chemoreceptor and the mechanoreceptors. But what about information on things like anxiety, for instance, or fear? Let's say someone is having this emotion. Their breathing pattern may change. Maybe they are in pain. So, this kind of things are actually coming from the hypothalamus. So, this is another region of their brain that sending information down to the respiratory center and helping to affect how we breathe. And finally, let's talk about the cerebrum. The cerebrum is responsible for all the voluntary stuff that we do. Things like singing, where have got to control your breath, or maybe you are playing a music instrument, or maybe you are yelling or screaming. Anything like that, you are going to want to control your breath. And so, this all voluntary control. But it is also great that our respiratory center can work on its own. Can you imagine if you had to always think about taking a breath? You couldn't do anything else, right? You couldn't sleep, you couldn't eat, you would always just be thinking about breathing. And finally, thank you for your listening.